The headlines, the stories, the news.
Meanwhile, actually happy we're doing this as number one because this should have been number one story. That's what this story. The CBN's. Okay, Mike's up. Today is live. Good morning, Lagos. Thank you very much indeed for staying tuned here on Smooth 98.1. It's time for Freshly Pressed 981. This is when we take the news, national news headlines, and we look at it in detail with analysis. And I'm Ayo Myro Essay.
I am Valentine Uhu.
Joining us for the analysis this morning, we have Tunde Okufi.
Morning, Ayo. Morning, Valentine.
Good morning, Tunde. Tunde is at Big Koofs on Twitter. And joining Tunde and us, we have Waji.
Waji.
Morning, morning, Valentine, and good morning, Lagos.
Good to have you here, Waji. Waji is at the corporate MC on Twitter, and the corporate is K, is the corporate with a K.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you can get involved in the conversation this morning by sending your messages to WhatsApp 0809 444 0981.
You can use Twitter. Our Twitter handle is at Smooth981FM. The hashtag is Freshly Pressed 981. Go on YouTube, subscribe to our channel if you haven't. Search it out by typing youtube.com/smooth98FM Lagos. And you can also leave a comment there.
All right, let's go on to our first story for today. From the Premium Times, cashless policy, reps demand halt of CBN's new charges on bank transactions. Waji, I'll come to you for this. The lawmakers took the resolution after adopting a motion brought under matters of urgent national importance by its spokesperson, Benjamin Kalu. Just as a recap, the CBN had announced on Wednesday that from Wednesday, September 18, certain cash deposits and withdrawals from individual bank accounts are to attract additional charges. Can you please take us through the story?
Okay, so this is a new version of the cashless policy that's come out to more or less like reinvigorate people to continue to use the electronic payment methods through the various avenues that exist. And I think it was quite clear regarding what those requirements were. Those were deposits over 500,000 will attract a particular penalty. Those over 1 million will attract a particular penalty. But now lawmakers have come out to now kick against this to say that they're Nigerian deposit money companies that are losing business as a result of this. And I think this is where the conflation now begins to come in with regards to what this now means, right?
Yes.
These companies can, because that's specifically what this issue is. The lawmakers are kicking against it because they're saying that you should not add hardship to people to companies that have set up, who now do transactions, who collect money, transfer money, et cetera, et cetera. But my point is this, is that there is a cost to handling physical cash. There is.
Yeah.
And the cashless policy is trying to drive a situation where if you eradicate a lot of cash in the system, I mean, beyond the security reasons and things of that nature, you now encourage a lot more activity because more people can be able to transfer money. You don't necessarily have to. I remember there were times when, I would do a particular job and somebody would be like, okay, well, I have the cash sitting with me in my office. Can you come and get it? Then I'll have to drive to another part of town, go get that particular cash and then bring it back. That's just not sustainable. Whereas now somebody can just transfer it from one account to another.
Yes.
And we cannot argue that the banks have become a lot more accommodating towards people opening bank accounts with requirements. You have digital banks now like Alat and all these different people that can get these things done. So the cashless policy is meant to initially and overall drive inclusion. It's not necessarily meant to like bring people down, and you can still operate as a company. You just have to get a lot more innovative and sophisticated with regards to what your business model now means, because you cannot continue to deal and handle that volume of cash because it just doesn't make sense. I appreciate and understand the reasons behind it, which is why I think they're using a few pilot states like Lagos and maybe Rivers and other places like that to see how this works. So let's just cool down, let's test it out, and let's just get used to it.
But essentially, it should be more of an encouraging.
That's what I thought.
Encouraging statement than a threat.
Exactly.
Because it came off like it
So
was a threat.
the question,
Exactly. So
another
then-
big
then-
question, Waji, is so the reps have made the demand.
Mhm.
To what effect will this be? Because do they have the right to halt it? When you read this headline for a number of people, you think, oh, okay, that means it's not going to happen anymore. It's
Okay.
coming to effect, from Wednesday. The reps have now convened emergency. Will the CBN
This is
hold
a
it?
fantastic question, and this is where the question of oversight now begins to come in. CBN, as far as I know, is meant to be an unmitigated, independent regulator
Yes.
in Nigeria for that particular reason.
Mm-hmm.
So why the legislative arm of our government feels that they can now begin to make these kind of calls, that is a whole other conversation regarding the definition of oversight.
Voice of the people.
What? Yeah.
So
Valentine, I don't. That's a bit of a stretch.
So it's the
Do you
voice of
understand?
the
That's a
people,
bit of a
just to make it
stretch.
clear that the it's still being implemented because
Yes.
they cannot
They
stop
cannot
it.
stop
yes,
it.
but
Yeah,
they
so-
can demand and invite them to come as they've done in this
Exactly,
report.
but you cannot, so that's why, Valentine, you have to be very, very careful what that voice of the people means, because CBN.
Was a question at the end.
No, I know, but
Yes.
we need to do that within the mandate of how these things exist.
Mhm.
CBN are an unmitigated independent regulator.
Yes.
Okay, so to Aya's point, the legislator cannot stop these things.
Mhm.
So you have to be very careful how that narrative is pushed forward.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So if you still withdraw over
There
500,000
will
on
be
deposit, there will be
penalties.
penalties.
Exactly. Yeah.
CBN
Or deposit. Yeah.
or deposit. Still on the Central Bank of Nigeria, they've been up to a lot of work. Tunde, let me come to you for this next one. CBN restricts forex for importation of cassava. So the Central Bank of Nigeria has said it will no longer provide foreign exchange for the importation of cassava, starch, ethanol, and all other derivatives into Nigeria. This is said to be part of the moves to encourage local production, local patronage. So please take us through the story.
Okay, so while all that is, and while we should do and we must do everything that we can to encourage local production and to reignite the economy and drive growth and all of those things. There's no better way to say it. The only okay, let me say it like this: it's better to. They're prerequisites.
Okay.
Certain things should have come before. You get in a sense. So there's a reason why we import these things. I mean, even with all the drive from different governments, there's a reason why we still import cassava. We import cassava because we don't produce enough to meet the demand.
No. Let me just point out something here. Actually, Nigeria is the largest producer of cassava in the world. However, we are not the largest exporters. So there's a gap somewhere there. We produce in large volumes. However, we are not able to export this produce. So we have, reading the statistics from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, Nigeria has over the years been one of the largest producers. I believe they're number one of cassava. However, not the largest exporters.
This is not about exports.
Exactly.
This is about imports. That's not
yeah.
So there's a shortfall. There's a shortfall.
So why are we
in domestic
importing?
demand.
Because the demand,
Because
demand,
there is
yeah.
a shortfall.
Okay.
We're not producing enough. That's why we're not even exporting. We're not producing enough for ourselves. We're cassava hungry. Right?
Okay.
We may be the largest producers of cassava, but we're not producing enough.
Does that
part of-
capture your question about the gap between what we
No,
produce and
not
what we export?
really,
No, the
yes,
reason why is
not-
because
yes,
we
not really.
consume majority of what we
We
produce.
Okay.
So that's why we don't have enough to export.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do
That
you get
makes
the
it clear.
point?
Yes.
All
Thank
right.
you very much. Yeah.
We may be the largest producer, but we're not producing
We're
enough to
eating
even
what?
meet our domestic demand,
Let alone exports.
let alone export.
All right.
Therefore, we need to import. And it's not just cassava. It's in poultry. It's in rice. It's in so many other things. It's not
We're a
about.
big country, man.
It's not just about shutting the borders. Now, you shut the borders when you have implemented capacity, right? And you've done everything that you could and you should ordinarily do to see that you're self-sustaining. Then you can say, oh, perhaps because the borders are a bit too porous, let me put more stringent measures in place at the borders, and that would, drive and encourage domestic production. To process, growing cassava is just one angle of it. Then you need to process it. Do we have power? Do we have power?
Do we have roads to transport?
We have
these
roads
things?
to transport things. We're just it's like Waji mentioned something. It's about laying. It's almost like layering hardship on people who are already in a hard situation. Do you understand? Yes, there are people profiting from smuggling items across the border, but it's an unideal situation already, and just clamping down doesn't fix the problem. And so Emefiele says this. I don't know if he's the one talking or he's talking through a special advisor.
He said he's on a meeting with some state governors.
State governors. You know how they send people around now. I don't know if he's the one. The story doesn't say it. Anyway, so, but regardless, it's from his office. And he says this is, what did he say? This is a direct, this was based on the directive by the president, Muhammadu Buhari. So if anyone is in doubt as to where a central bank takes its leaning from, I mean, the man has said it as much. It's clear, it's crystal clear. I mean, according to our laws, it may not be, we're not in the West, we're in Africa. So, but these are things that investors also look at to say, how independent is our treasury or the Apex Bank. That's another thing that stood out for me. But let's put things in order. It's like, it's what they've done to cars. They've slapped on massive duties for importation of cars, and we don't have local capacity. We're just adding hardship.
All right.
Messages here. We have a lot of them. This one is from Rainmaker. It says, point of correction, CBN banning Forex for cassava is not the move to improve domestic cultivation. Actually, yeah, that has been addressed there. Thank you. Chika says from Marina, no matter how beautiful we paint the cashless policy by CBN, it boils down only to one thing. The country is broke. Why enforcing the cashless policy at the same time you're raising
What does that
VAT?
have to do with the cashless policy?
Is it Nigeria? Welcome to the next level. Effiong says CBN should always use 2 months at least to enlighten people about its policy before introducing introduction and implementation.
Valentine, even if you gave them 6 months.
They've actually been talking about this for
No,
years.
Yeah, I was going to say
I get it. So the pronouncements are always with immediate effect. It's a shock therapy approach to issues as well. Pay attention to the news. Border closure from Prince says border closure is not because of rice, it's because of security, according to NSA. Have you guys also seen a statement in NPC GMD on surplus petroleum in depot as a result of border closure? So one of the other reasons too was to check smuggling.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to our next story. Tunde, I will stay with you for this. Court orders forfeiture of P&ID's assets over $9.6 billion liability. So the Federal High Court sitting in Abuja yesterday gave the federal government the nod to seize all assets belonging to P&ID Limited, Virgin Island, and its Nigerian affiliate P&ID Nigeria Limited. An interesting twist to this P&ID saga. What do you have to say about this?
The plot thickens. If this is executed or is carried through, do we get that 9.6 billion? Do we? I think so. Like, can we pay them and then seize it back? Like, it would be nice
So
to
balance
know. Exactly. It's not entirely clear, but look, some of the things that come out to me is that this. We know deals like this, and yes, it didn't start at 9.6 million. I think it was,
was it millions or
yes,
hundreds of millions?
Hundreds of millions, I think about 300 or so. I can't recall. But because we didn't, we reached a settlement, we didn't honor the settlement, and then interest on it, has gone to this degree. But one of the things that I would like to know, and I would like the public to know, who are all the beneficial owners of these companies. A number of interesting names, power brokers within, our political elite have come, have been mentioned or rumored, but nothing that we can take, nothing in the papers. It would be nice to know. Perhaps it will make it clearer as to why this issue has been difficult for us to deal with and deal with properly over the years, to the point that it's crystallized to this degree and to this extent. It's another twist in the plot, like you said. It would be interesting to see how it plays out. If I doubt that's the case, but it's a wish on my part that if this judgment says that all of the assets and everything are to be seized, potentially, and it's on the premise that they were fraudulent in the first place.
And I know a number of people have talked about just how legitimate the P&ID company was.
It's a briefcase base. It existed only in the documents that were signed. That's what the evidence so to speaks to, and it feels like in a sense, the deal itself was fraudulent and the country was being defrauded. So to win a judgment on top of that, because the government didn't meet certain obligations, just makes everything convoluted.
Thank you very much, Tunde. All right, let's move on to our next one. NIPOST clamps down on illegal operators of courier services in Nigeria. The Nigerian Postal Service has clamped down on mentions Express Limited, Westwood Courier Service, and Easy Errand Courier Service for illegal operations. They've said that they're not registered under NIPOST, and so they've stopped their operations. Why, please take us through this story?
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward thing just to come out. I think people just need to be, because I always, when you go online and you hear these things, people get very, very upset that why they're doing this, and just to make it clear. NIPOS is the equivalent of the Postmaster General. That's pretty much what they are. They're the number one regulator when it comes to the movement of physical documents and other goods or services through a courier service. That's what their mandate is. And if you want to operate in that capacity, whether it's through a private need or whatever the case may be, you need to have a license. If you don't have a license that is functioning, renewed, or intact, you should get suspended. Why? Because the regulator needs to make sure that your organization meets the requirements of what it means to have a license, which is the number of locations and geopolitical zones, how you operate your physical infrastructure, your transportation infrastructure, etc., etc. And they also need to have checks and balances to make sure that you are not participating in the movement and transportation of illicit and illegal goods and or services. So when you do not happen to meet those requirements, you get suspended. Pure and simple.
This article also sounds, a note of warning to those who are not even aware that they ought
So
to
go
be.
get your
Yeah,
license.
so
If you
that
get
if
caught,
not,
you can get arrested. Yeah.
And another thing, Tune, you're going to say something. and then I'll make a
I
point.
just wanted to that I hope that this isn't extending to cover people who are, what's the line between courier service and the guys who we call or describe as logistics companies?
No, they're registered.
Not moving.
They're supposed to be registered.
No,
And
So,
that's-
but are they under my question? Are they under the purview of like NIPOS?
Yes, they are.
Yes.
As long as
All of
you.
them, so it's
No.
not about letters. And
No.
stuff,
This
and
one's
it's
about
all moving
documents.
goods.
There's a definition for what that is.
Specifically for
For
documents.
documents,
Right,
yeah,
great.
exactly.
all right. And another thing I
That
was going
fall
to
under
mention.
the remit of what NIPOS considers as documents.
So
Yeah.
I was going to also mention the license fee, which is 2 million naira annually, and I thought, is that not too steep? How much
How do
revenue?
you quantify that?
Well, if you're a business of,
Yeah.
and the requirements are that you're supposed to have national presence, and I would say national presence, and you're supposed to be in a certain scale.
2 million is nothing.
I think 2 million.
Do you know-
if it's a national license? I think
Listen,
2 million.
NIPOS itself, and I know as of 2016, 2017, the VI branch, NIPOS, was doing 1 billion naira in revenue per annum. Okay, so that's 2 million. So that's the volume. I remember.
Well, if they're charging 2 million naira per
to
company,
get a
they will
license,
make.
yeah.
They'll make
No,
it-
to Tunde's point is that for
Yeah.
a country the size of Nigeria with our
Yeah.
population, that you can generate
For a
that
national,
amount
yeah, for a national license,
carrier.
I
Yeah.
think
Alright.
it is.
Thank you very much.
We have a lot of messages to go through. Sean says the regulator that doesn't meet requirements are regulating organizations that go above and beyond them. LOL. It says, this one, please add your name to your messages. Barry from Lagos says the real issue is NIPOS being participant and regulator in the industry at the same time. Imagine a NITA regulating
So
telcos.
it's always a problem. Though.
Barry
It's a
from
problem.
Lagos.
And we have a lot of that.
Yeah, I agree.
And Shaya from VI says, on the CBN cashless policy implementation, in addition to all the reasons clearly stated for the implementation, I'm assuming that they are also trying to deal with corruption as well. This is from the point of view that there are numerous under-the-table dealings that are handled with cash. And what this policy is aiming to do is force the use of electronic means of transactions to easily trace funds when the need becomes necessary. I'm still asking, when it comes to elections, I want to see this go through.
I was going to say that 2% or 3%, if I'm if the purpose is corruption, is not a big deal in many instances. I'll pay it. I already factor it into the money I'm about to do.
And that's the
Because
point.
of
Thank
corruption.
you. And that's the point. Is that there was a joke, there was a joke on Twitter about a guy who did the math of, okay, I might as well go to Ibadan to deposit 500, 700,000 naira because it's only going to
gonna
cost
cost
me
me
15,000 to go
yeah.
to Ibadan and back.
Oh, go to Ibadan, have
Um,
a meal,
and
go to
stay,
the cinema.
right, okay, you saw
Go on
that
a date,
breakdown.
go on a date and go clubbing.
versus paying 721,000. So do you know what? If you want to get involved in that, then factor that into it. I'm sorry, there's no free lunch.
Please say no to corruption.
Yes, still not corruption.
Let's move on to this next story from Premium Times. I'll come to you, Tunde, for analysis on this. Nigerian soldiers seal another office, the International Humanitarian Organization. They surrounded the Damaturu office, according to this report, of the Action Against Hunger, an international non-governmental organization in Yobe State. Just about 24 hours ago, we heard the United States government is pulling its funds from, giving aid and support in terms of food to some of these locations in the northeast or northwestern part of Nigeria. Your thoughts on this, please?
Okay, so I don't know if the soldiers, it's not clear whether the soldiers sealing off is in relation to the US pulling out or not, and the story is actually very slim on any details. It just says that they sealed it off. The only usually, I postulate here that usually when this happens is when they feel that the NGO or the aid agency is somehow hampering or enabling crime or terrorism, and feeding, in this instance, perhaps providing channels of resupply of food to terrorists. And that can be the only. And if you look at it, it's Action Against Hunger. It's like the Red Cross and Red Crescent. They will, doctors always, they will treat anyone. That's their that's their motto. That's their remedy.
It's a Hippocratic act.
Hippocratic exactly.
Oath.
Oath.
Yes.
You have to, right? So if people have been devastated or ravaged, especially in conflicts and issues like this, where it's the insurgency is within the communities, then therefore hard to say, okay, this is an active, militant terrorist, or this person is not, or this person's family is not. So obviously there are gray lines, and those lines often sometimes get crossed, and perhaps the military has received reports around that and they've gone to shut it down. So.
All right, interesting. Thank you very much for your analysis. Waji, let's come back to you for this, but quickly take
Yomi Akarakiri on Twitter says, thanks, Waji. I can see whalers who want PMB to approve electronic voting attacking electronic banking.
That was brilliant.
Waji, let's talk about this now from Daily Times. Federal government develops anti-money laundering terrorist financing strategy, closely related to what we just discussed, and Tunde touched on in his analysis of the previous story. They said they expressed commitments through its Minister of Interior, Ogbeni Ralph Arabashola, to meeting global standards for combating money laundering and terrorist financing in the country. I read through the story. I saw no clear indication of any technology that was
No, of course not.
purchased with this.
Were you expecting to see anything?
I was expecting it.
Okay, how? Okay, great. All right, basically that's what they're coming up with, is just trying to figure out how best, maybe also discussion around how do we develop an anti-money laundering strategy for terrorism financing. And for me it's very, very simple, because it's kind of weak on the details, unfortunately. But I think at the end of the day, what this boils down to is how best do you now build strong institutions. There's something that was said within the statement of the article, if you go through it, that look, the confidence of foreign investors would be boosted and also enhance socioeconomic activities. This is what Tuchel said, and I agree with that. That is very, very important, and that's the larger narrative that we need to pay attention to, is that you cannot garner the kind of social activity you're looking for if you do not have these policies or strategies in place. But you cannot do that unless you build strong institutions. You cannot build strong institutions unless you have strong technocrats running those institutions. You cannot have strong technocrats unless you have an education system that creates strong technocrats. So I can unlayer this onion all day long, but the point being is that we just need to make sure we have the right systems in place for this to exist. It's a philosophical approach to how you do business and how you regulate and how you handle these kind of activities. Let's use a very, very quick example of what the FBI did to catch those 80 quote-unquote Yahoo boys that were getting involved. It took them about 3 years, and they spent $1 billion.
There's a new list.
Okay, and there's a new list. Thank you. So they spent $1 billion to get to this point. That's your strategy. You have to invest money, because there's a lot of intelligence required. There's a lot of data gathering, and there's a lot of sourcing for all that information, which is manpower related, which now correlates to hours in terms of translating that to how much that costs. And you have to invest in the right people who are trained and who have the right intuition to handle these things. So your strategy has to be built around making sure you have a strong institution that would allow you to fight this to fight money laundering and terrorism.
Thank you. Next story, very quickly. Let's move on to more borrowing from New Telegraph. Now, it's reported that Nigeria is seeking a fresh 2.5 billion naira from the World Bank. What is this about? I mean, we know that as at April, the World Bank lowered its 2019 growth forecast for Nigeria from 2.1% to from 2.2% to 2.1%. And we're still borrowing more.
Yeah.
Where does this put us?
Sorry, before I wanted to say about the last story. I mean, it's Friday, so I can.
Yes.
Is Ogbeni part of Rao's name? It's really, if the listeners, if anyone here, if the listeners, I'm curious. Is Ogbeni part of his name?
I think Ogbeni Yoruba translates to
Ogbeni means
Mr.
Mr.
But I don't think it's that.
No, but
So
the way
it's not
it's
his name,
religiously
so maybe-
followed.
yes,
Like,
Mr.
it's a part of his name, eh?
Mr.
If anybody knows, they should let us know.
He's a Yoruba man to the core.
And with his boka, nika boka, what they call the thing. Right.
It's actually part of his name.
Yeah. Okay. Onto us borrowing. I'm borrowing from the World Bank 2.5. We seek a fresh 2.5 billion. $2.5 billion. And your questions were around why are we borrowing? I mean,
where does this put us?
Where does it put us?
Debt profile
It puts
is
us as
increasing.
debtors.
We're $2.5 billion in the hole.
You know, right? And we're borrowing because we have to, quite simply. and it's the same stories. We're not producing at a level. What would be painful is when we borrow, and as we've done for years and decades, is to borrow to fund, excesses, borrow to fund recurring expenditure as opposed to putting it into infrastructure. Our creditors have become, as the world obviously has changed and evolved, have become a lot more, concerned about what funds are being put towards. So often they'll say, okay, this facility is for you to invest in, such and such a project, and then they disperse funds in line with that, the milestones of that project and that project execution. I hope that's the case here. The truth is, the World Bank, because growth since now they call it contraction. That since we came out of contraction in 2016, we've really only grown 1.9% in the 3 months to June. The World Bank consequently has had to review its forecast, its growth forecast for the country in the year. I brought it down by a couple of basis points. So look, we need the money. We're not producing and earning we don't have enough money to fund our budget. So clearly we need to borrow. And pretty much that's what it's about. The rest of it then talks about the condition. Where does it leave us? Like you said, the state of our debts. In 2015, our external debt stood at about $10.3 billion. As of today, it's 25.6 billion. So, and then we're adding this on top. So let's just hope that we spend it on the right things, because we've said this over and over. Our parents said it. We're saying it. We're leaving debt for the next generation, and we're just burdening them. But
when the reverse is supposed to be the case, right?
Yeah, we need to keep the lights on. So
all right, let's move on to this newspaper. Thank you, Tunde. Waju, this time around, the Inspector General of Police in this story, Mr. Mohammed Adamu, in a statement he made yesterday, he seemed to be justifying, or rather explaining, the reason why they negotiate with bandits. Your thoughts on this, as there's a reference to Niger Delta militants and Amnesty?
We will not negotiate with terrorists. All right. Look, in fairness to him, I agree. Okay? And the best way to explain this is that every good intelligence service needs a snitch. And that's pretty much what this is. All right? I remember there was a movie, I can't remember who it was, one of these Denzel Washington movies, where he cracked a joke that with all this intelligence, I can pay Pookie down the corner of $20 and he can give me all the information I need.
That's right.
So basically, what he's saying is that we should try a different approach to tackling these things. And if you happen to engage with people, quote unquote bandits, who happen to have information or be able to negotiate their way out of certain things, then we should go ahead and use that platform. I agree with it. Whether or not it's the best approach, that's a completely different conversation. But I see the logic of it, because that way you're now able to get information out of a particular person that can now lead to the eradication of crime. That is perfectly fine. And if you can do that without making sure people get hurt or people get killed, then go ahead. All right. So if people who happen to be involved in nefarious activities have information, you're able to negotiate and engage with them and work out some kind of plea deal or whatever the case may be, reduce sentence for them to now provide you with the necessary detail you need to fight crime, then I am all for it. As long as it leads to some kind of peace and people are not hurt, even those that commit the crime are not hurt in the process, and it can lead to lawful arrest, then I am all for it.
Thank you.
Sobitin Kenobi says borrowing in itself is not bad. It's knowing that it's not for deserved, in quotes, SUVs. That's the agony. And then thanks for your question earlier on, Tunde. We've gone through the history and we understand that the reason why he's called Ogbeni is because when he became governor, rather than being called Your Excellency, when he became governor of Osun State, he was asked, he said they shouldn't call him Your Excellency, instead referred to him as Ogbeni, which translates to Mr. As with, I remember His Excellency, the former president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, who said he wanted to be known as Babaya, but when they asked him, what should we call you? So it's just, that's the history behind that name.
For Arabashala is stuck, and it's even on Wikipedia as Ogbeni.
They stick with it. So,
like Ashiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the titles that come before.
Please let's quickly touch on this story today from New Telegraph. Federal government states to fund national livestock program with 100 billion naira. Quick to add stamp on this.
Yeah, this is in relation. You remember that Northern governors also met to talk about, the ways forward.
Yes.
And in that meeting, I had one of the things I said when I analyzed it, is that there was no monies were voted. So let's say this is the money, that is, going to match that. This most 80% is going to be put down by the federal government. and the rest contributed by the states. Look, we need a national strategy for livestock, because one, it's leading to conflicts across the nation. So we need to implement stuff and implement the ideas and programs. Ideas are not the problem usually. You need to back that with funds, and then our next big problem is make sure that those funds are judicially spent and not stolen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tunde. Thank you to all those who've sent in messages. Thank you very much to our analysts. Thank you, Tunde Okufi at Big Coops on Twitter. And thank you, Waji at the Corporate MC on Twitter. Corporate is the K. And thank you to everyone who sent in messages, like I mentioned earlier on. Unfortunately, we cannot go through every single message each morning, but we appreciate them. And as much as possible, we'll try to go through them. We'll go on a break. When we come back at 8:15, we have the Locker Room 981 with Tega. This is Smooth 98.1.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much.
Hey.
Let me ask